Crushed by debt and caring for her family, she was a secretary who felt invisible. He, a cold billionaire, his heart armored against love after a devastating betrayal. A storm left them trapped, and the forced proximity unveiled an overwhelming passion. But what seemed like destiny was a trap, woven by a cruel enemy who would turn their purest feelings into a deadly weapon. Now, with her family in danger and his empire threatened, she will have to unearth dark secrets and face the most devastating truth of all before it's too late for love. Rain lashed against the windows of the 30th floor of Valmont Tower, where Elena Diaz remained hunched over her desk, typing financial reports under the yellowish glow of her desk lamp. Her oversized glasses slipped down her nose as she checked the numbers for the third time that night. At 25, Eleanor had grown accustomed to the unpaid overtime, the scornful glances from colleagues, and the constant sense of invisibility that clung to her like a second skin. Another night lost, she murmured to herself, adjusting the grey blouse she'd bought on sale 2 years ago. Her executive assistant's salary barely covered Grandmother Maria's medical expenses for diabetes and hypertension, and her brother Lucas's night college tuition. Elena had abandoned her own dreams of studying literature to ensure he had a better future. On the top floor of the building, Arthur Valmont watched New York City through the glass walls of his private office. At 37, he commanded a tech empire valued in the billions, yet his expression remained as cold as the marble lining his office floor. The scars of Isabella's betrayal, his ex-fiancée, still burned in his memory. She had leaked intimate details of his life to the press, turning his vulnerability into sensational headlines, all for a sum offered by a corporate rival. Employees are replaceable parts, he repeated to himself, a maxim that had become his mantra after discovering half his team had been compromised during the scandal. Arthur saw no faces, only functions. The secretary on the floor below was simply the one who types the reports. He didn't even know her full name. The storm approaching the city promised to be one of the worst of the year. Meteorologists warned of winds up to 75 miles per hour, and New York City's power grid was already showing signs of overload. At Valmont Tech, employees were dismissed early, but Elena remained to finalize the quarterly report Arthur needed to present the next day. When the first lightning bolt sliced through the sky, followed by a deafening thunderclap, the building lights flickered. Elena instinctively saved her work, recalling the IT technician's advice. 2 minutes later, a second bolt directly struck the neighborhood transformer, plunging the entire area into darkness. The emergency generators activated automatically, but something had gone wrong. The security system, confused between primary and auxiliary power, interpreted the situation as an attempted invasion and activated a full lockdown protocol. All magnetic doors sealed shut, emergency stairwells were blocked, and elevators ground to a halt. Elena felt panic rise in her throat as she realized she was trapped. She tried her cell phone, but there was no signal. The reception desk radio emitted only static. She ascended the stairs as far as she could, only to find locked doors and silent alarms blinking in the darkness. On the top floor, Arthur also discovered his gilded cage. His private penthouse, with panoramic city views, had become a glass and steel cage. He punched the wall hard, his calculating mind already working on solutions that seemed non-existent. The communication system was dead, the satellite phone didn't work during the storm, and his security team had left before the lockdown. It was then that he heard hesitant footsteps in the corridor. A faint mobile flashlight beam danced on the walls, slowly approaching. Arthur frowned. Who else could be trapped in this building? Elena climbed each floor, her heart pounding, searching for any living soul or an exit the system hadn't locked down. When she reached the top floor, she came upon the double doors of the executive penthouse. To her surprise, they were open. "Who's there?" Arthur's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Elena froze. It was Arthur Valmont's own voice, the man who intimidated her even from a distance, with his impeccable suits and sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through people. She had never been this close to him, never spoken to him directly. It's Elena, sir. Elena Diaz from accounting." Her voice trembled slightly. "I was finishing the reports when everything locked down." Arthur emerged from the shadows, his imposing silhouette outlined against the windows where lightning intermittently illuminated the sky. He examined her with cold eyes, as if trying to recall where he had seen her before. "The secretary," he said, his voice laced with irritation. "Great, exactly what I needed on a night like this." Arthur observed Elena with the same disdain he reserved for all his employees, but this time something irritated him even more deeply. Perhaps it was the situation of vulnerability. He, a man accustomed to absolute control, trapped like a caged animal beside an insignificant subordinate. "Did you check all the exits?" he asked, his cutting voice echoing through the luxurious penthouse. Eleanor nodded nervously, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, sir. All the doors are locked, the emergency stairwells too. The elevator isn't working and—" She hesitated. "There's no cell signal." Obviously. Arthur ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "The security system went haywire with the storm. It could take hours until someone realizes we're trapped here." Elena remained standing near the entrance, her simple clothes contrasting starkly with the sophisticated surroundings. Italian leather armchairs, contemporary artwork, and a breathtaking city view made the social chasm separating them painfully evident. She felt like an intruder, especially considering Arthur's intimidating reputation. "Sit," he ordered curtly, gesturing toward one of the armchairs. "Standing there like a statue isn't going to get us out of here any faster." Elena hesitantly obeyed, sitting on the edge of the armchair, as if ready to bolt at any moment. Arthur poured himself a whiskey from the liquor cabinet, not offering her any. To him, she remained just an employee out of place. "What were you doing here so late?" he asked, more out of irritation than genuine interest. "Finishing the quarterly report for your presentation tomorrow," Elena replied softly. "There were some figures that didn't add up, and I wanted to double-check before you turned in something wrong and got fired," Arthur completed sarcastically. "At least one of you has a sense of responsibility." The cruel comment made Elena blush with humiliation, but she didn't retort. She desperately needed the job. Arthur noticed her reaction and felt a strange pang of guilt. Impossible. He had learned long ago that kindness was seen as weakness. As the hours passed, the storm outside intensified. Lightning intermittently illuminated the dark sky, creating an almost surreal atmosphere inside the penthouse. Arthur tried to focus on emails on his laptop, but the battery was dying. Elena remained silent, discreetly observing the details of an environment she had never imagined seeing. "Do you have family?" The question escaped Arthur almost without him realizing it. Perhaps it was the forced isolation or the whiskey, but something made him break the silence. Elena looked up surprised. "I have a grandmother and a younger brother," she said, her voice gaining a subtle warmth as she spoke of them. "My grandmother is ill, and my brother is in engineering college." Arthur studied her with more attention this time. There was something in her eyes, a purity, a genuine dedication that he hadn't seen in years. "And your parents? They died when I was 18. A car accident." Elena lowered her gaze. "Since then, I've been taking care of everyone." For a moment, Arthur felt a strange connection to that pain. He too had lost his parents young, taking over the family empire before he was prepared. But he quickly pushed that thought away. Compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford. "And you never thought about having your own life?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Eleanor blushed intensely. I never had time to think about it," she whispered. The truth was, at 25, she had never even kissed a man. Between work and family responsibilities, romantic love seemed an abstract concept, something she only knew through the books she read in her few free hours. Arthur noticed her blush and hesitation. There was an innocence there that completely unnerved him. In his world, all women had ulterior motives, complex romantic histories, calculating ambitions. Elena seemed to exist outside of this cynical reality he knew. "How old are you?" he asked, leaning slightly forward. 25, she replied, still avoiding his gaze. 25, and never had time to live, Arthur murmured, more to himself. Something in that simple confession struck him unexpectedly. For an instant, he saw Elena not as the ugly secretary his prejudices had labeled her, but as a woman who had sacrificed her youth for love of her family. The moment was interrupted when another powerful lightning bolt sliced through the sky, followed by a thunderclap that made the windows tremble. The emergency lights flickered and then went out completely, leaving them in total darkness. "Shit," Arthur muttered, fumbling for his cell phone to use as a flashlight. Elena felt the panic grow. The absolute darkness, the isolation, the proximity to that intimidating man, everything conspired against her composure. Her breathing quickened, and she began to hyperventilate. "Hey, are you okay?" Arthur's voice sounded closer, and she felt a firm hand touch her shoulder. The touch was like an electric shock. Elena had never been touched by a man in that way, protective, caring. Even in the darkness, she could feel his powerful presence, his masculine scent, the warmth emanating from his body. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had only read about. Desire. Arthur also felt something shift in that moment. Her vulnerability, the way she trembled under his touch, awakened instincts he had buried years ago. Dangerous instincts of protection and attraction. "I'll look for some candles," he said, his voice hoarser than he intended. When Arthur returned with the lit candles, he found Elena curled up in the armchair, her large eyes reflecting the golden light of the flames. She seemed even more fragile and, simultaneously, more beautiful than he had perceived before. "It'll be okay," he said, sitting closer this time. "Someone will realize we're here." Elena nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on him. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as the intimidating boss, but as a lonely man with his own scars and fears. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the penthouse, something more dangerous was brewing between them. A forbidden attraction that neither was prepared to face, separated by different worlds, yet united by the most improbable circumstance. By candlelight, the atmosphere gained an intimacy neither had anticipated. Arthur had found some blankets in a closet, and with a kindness that surprised him, offered one to Eleanor. She accepted gratefully, wrapping herself in the soft fabric that still carried his masculine scent. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers accidentally brushing his during the exchange. The contact was brief, but both felt the electricity that passed between them. Arthur pulled away quickly, pouring himself another whiskey. "Don't mention it, it's just practical. If you get sick, I'll have to explain it to HR. Eleanor smiled shyly at his attempt to maintain emotional distance. "Have you always been this way? So cautious with people?" The question caught him off guard. Arthur stopped with the glass halfway to his lips. "Cautious is a gentle understatement." "Why?" The question came out more direct than Elena intended, but the darkness and isolation seemed to have dissolved some of her inhibitions. Arthur studied her for a long moment. There was something in her sincerity, in the way her eyes observed him without judgment, that made him want to answer. Perhaps it was the loneliness of recent years or the surrealness of the situation, but he found himself talking about things he'd never discussed with anyone. "Do you read newspapers, Elena?" he asked, his voice heavy with bitterness. "Sometimes, when I have time." "Then perhaps you remember the Valmont Isabella scandal from 3 years ago?" "Back." Eleanor frowned, trying to remember. Vaguely, she recalled the sensational headlines about billionaire Arthur Valmont's broken engagement. "The model who leaked information about you?" "Intimate information," Arthur corrected, his jaw tightening. She knew every one of my vulnerabilities, every emotional scar, every moment of weakness, and she sold all of it to Marcus Thorne, my biggest corporate rival, for $5 million. Eleanor's heart ached. She betrayed you. For money, Arthur said, downing his whiskey in one gulp. I later discovered that our entire relationship had been a charade. She was planted by Thorne to spy on me, to uncover business and personal secrets that could be used against me. For 2 years, I believed I was in love with a woman who was being paid to pretend she loved me. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of rain against the windows. Elena felt his pain as if it were her own. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I don't want your pity," Arthur retorted, but his voice lacked its usual harshness. "It's not pity," Elena said, surprising herself with her courage. "It's understanding. I know what it's like to be hurt by someone you trusted." Arthur looked up at her. "You?" Elena hesitated, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her blouse. She had never told that story to anyone, not even her grandmother. It was her most painful secret, guarded like a wound that had never fully healed. "I was 19, she began, her voice almost a whisper. "Right after my parents died. I was completely lost, trying to balance work, taking care of Grandma and Lucas. I met someone, a guy who worked at the hospital where my grandmother was getting treatment." Arthur leaned forward, intrigued by the change in her expression. "His name was Daniel. He was different, kind, attentive. For the first time since my parents died, I felt less alone. He knew about our financial situation, knew I was working 2 jobs to pay the bills." Elena paused, taking a deep breath. "I trusted him completely. I even told him about my parents' life insurance policy, the money I was saving for Lucas's college." Arthur felt a chill in his stomach, anticipating what was coming. "One night, he told me he loved me, that he wanted to take care of me, that I didn't have to carry all that weight alone. He offered to invest the policy money in a guaranteed venture that would double our resources." Elena closed her eyes, the pain still fresh, even after 6 years. "I was so naive, so desperate to believe someone could love me, that I gave him everything." "He stole the money," Arthur concluded, his voice laced with a rage that surprised him. $70,000, Elena confirmed, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "Everything that was left from my parents, my brother's future. When I found out he had disappeared, that the business was a scam, I almost gave up on everything." Arthur felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had buried long ago. True compassion, mixed with a protective fury that startled him. "That's why you work so hard," he said, finally understanding. "To get back what he stole. To give Lucas the chance he deserves. To take care of Grandma. To prove to myself that I can still trust my own judgment, even if I never trust." She stopped abruptly. "Men," Arthur completed softly. Eleanor nodded, embarrassed to have revealed so much. "That's why I've never gotten involved with anyone since. I couldn't. Every time someone got close, I'd remember how stupid I was, how I destroyed my family's future because of sweet words and empty promises." Arthur remained silent for a long moment, processing the revelation. Elena's innocence wasn't just shyness or lack of opportunity. It was an armor built on a devastating betrayal, just like his own. "You weren't stupid," he said finally, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard. "You were human. You loved. You trusted. That's not stupidity, Elena. That's courage." She looked up at him, surprised by the understanding in his voice. For the first time in years, someone wasn't judging her for her past naivete. "Perhaps we both learned to protect ourselves from the wrong people," Arthur murmured, his eyes meeting hers through the golden candlelight. In that moment, something shifted between them. It was no longer just physical attraction or curiosity. It was mutual recognition, two wounded souls who had found, in the most unlikely person, someone who truly understood their pain. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the penthouse, surrounded by darkness and the flickering candlelight, Arthur and Elena discovered that sometimes the most bruised hearts are the ones that best understand each other. Around 3 in the morning, the storm had intensified beyond any forecast. Winds howled against the building with a force that made the structure groan, and rain lashed against the windows like hail bullets. Arthur and Elena had settled at opposite ends of the leather sofa, maintaining a safe distance, but their conversations had deepened dangerously. "You really never thought about rebuilding your romantic life?" Elena asked, surprised by her own courage to ask such a question to her intimidating boss. Arthur gave a bitter laugh. "Love? That word ceased to exist in my vocabulary. Now there's only mutual convenience, pre-nuptial agreements, relationships with exit clauses." "What a sad life," Elena murmured, and Arthur was shocked by the painful sincerity of the comment. "And you," he returned, "are you going to spend your whole life paying for the mistakes of a scoundrel who didn't deserve even your eyelashes?" Before Elena could answer, a deafening crash shook the entire building. A gigantic lightning bolt had directly struck the structure, causing an overload that made all the emergency lights flicker wildly before going out for good. But what came next was worse. A sharp, metallic sound, as if something was breaking. What the hell was that? Arthur rose quickly, but he had barely taken 2 steps when the entire penthouse trembled violently. The enormous glass windows that formed the entire west wall began to crack under the pressure of the winds. One of them, the largest, developed a crack that spread like a spiderweb across its entire expanse. "Arthur!" Eleanor screamed when she saw the window shatter. Instinct completely overwhelmed him. Without thinking of the consequences or the propriety of the gesture, Arthur threw himself over Elena, knocking her to the floor and covering her body with his own, just as thousands of glass fragments exploded through the room. The wind and rain invaded the penthouse like a furious beast. Arthur felt several shards cut his back through his suit jacket, but he kept Elena protected beneath him, his arms forming a barrier around her head. "Don't move," he ordered, his voice hoarse close to her ear. "There's still glass falling." Elena was breathless, feeling the weight of his masculine body over hers, the warmth emanating from him, the way his muscles were tense with protection. Her heart raced. But it wasn't just fear. It was something far more disturbing and primitive. When finally the sound of falling glass ceased, Arthur slightly lifted his head to assess the damage. The penthouse was devastated. Glass shards covered the entire floor. Furniture was overturned, and rain poured in torrentially through the gigantic opening where there had once been a wall of windows. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with a concern that startled him. "No," Eleanor whispered, but her hands trembled when she raised them to touch his face. "You're bleeding." Arthur felt her delicate fingers touch a small wound on his forehead, and the sensation was like an electric shock. "It's just a scratch." But when they tried to get up, they discovered the situation was much worse. Glass shards covered the entire floor around them. Elena's simple sandals offered zero protection, and Arthur realized that even with dress shoes, it would be dangerous to move in the dark. "We're stuck here," he said, looking around. They were on a small island of safety amidst the chaos. The sofa had collapsed onto its side, creating a natural barrier against the debris, but leaving it would mean serious cuts. The rain continued to pour in, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Elena began to tremble, her thin clothes offering little protection against the damp cold. "Come here," Arthur said, opening his arms. "I can't. It wouldn't be appropriate," she began, but her teeth chattered so much she could barely speak. "Elena, you'll die of hypothermia if you don't get warm. Forget propriety for a moment." His voice was firm, but she could hear the genuine concern behind the order. Hesitantly, she moved closer. Arthur pulled her to him, wrapping her in his arms and covering both of them with the blanket they had managed to save. Elena found herself pressed against his chest, feeling the beat of his heart against her cheek. "Better?" he asked, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. Elena nodded but couldn't speak. Being so close to him, feeling his warm skin through his torn shirt, breathing his masculine scent mixed with the smell of rain. It was awakening sensations she had never experienced. Her body was reacting in ways that embarrassed and frightened her. Arthur was also fighting reactions he shouldn't be having. Elena fit perfectly against him, her small, feminine body awakening primitive instincts of protection and desire. Her soft scent, the way she breathed against his neck, the absolute trust with which she surrendered to his protection. Everything conspired against his self-control. "Arthur." She whispered his name, and the sound was like honey poured into his parched soul. "Yes? Thank you. For protecting me." He lowered his gaze and met her eyes. Even in the dim light, he could see the gratitude, the admiration, and something more. Something that made his blood boil. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse, "you shouldn't look at me like that." "Like what?" she asked innocently, unaware of the devastating effect her proximity was having on him. "As if I were a hero, as if I were a good man." "But you are," she said with absolute conviction. "You sacrificed your safety to protect me. You—" Arthur couldn't resist any longer. He leaned down and captured her lips with his, in a kiss that was intended to be soft, but quickly transformed into something desperate and hungry. Elena froze for an instant, shocked, but then something primal awoke in her. Her arms rose around his neck, and she returned the kiss with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally separated, both were breathless. This can't happen," Arthur said, but his hands continued to caress her hair. "Why not?" Elena asked, her innocence showing through the sincere question. "Because I'm your boss. Because you're too young. Because I'm going to end up hurting you, Elena. It's what I do. It's what I've always done." But even as he spoke, he couldn't pull away from her. The kiss had broken all the barriers they had built throughout the night. The storm outside paled in comparison to the storm that had awakened between them. Elena raised her hand and touched his face again. "What if I'm willing to take that risk?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with dangerous possibilities and consequences neither was prepared to face. The world outside, with its rules, prejudices, and judgments, seemed very distant. Here, in that cocoon of forced intimacy, only they existed. And for the first time in years, both allowed themselves to imagine what it would be like to set aside their fears and surrender to what was blossoming between them. Rescue arrived at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight pierced through the dissipating clouds. The fire department had managed to deactivate the security system and unlock the magnetic doors. When the elevator doors opened, they found Arthur and Elena still embracing on the destroyed sofa, asleep amidst the glass debris. "Mr. Valmont!" The fire captain rushed over to them. "Are you injured?" Arthur woke first, immediately conscious of the compromising situation. Elena was nestled against his chest, her hair spread over his torn shirt. Carefully, he gently woke her. "Elena, help is here." She slowly opened her eyes, and for a moment smiled with a sweetness that made Arthur's heart ache. Then reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. She was in Arthur Valmont's arms, her boss, in rumpled clothes, messy hair, and dozens of people were watching. "Oh my God," she murmured, trying to pull away quickly, but Arthur held her firmly. "Slowly," he said quietly. "The floor still has glass." Paramedics quickly examined them, some superficial cuts on Arthur, a small bruise on Elena's arm, nothing serious. But while they were being attended to, Arthur noticed something disturbing. Smartphones being subtly raised, photos being taken, Whispers among the emergency personnel and building security. "We need to get out of here," he said to Elena as they were escorted to the elevator. On the ground floor of the building, the situation worsened. Reporters had already gathered, alerted by police scanners about the dramatic rescue at the Valmont Tech building. Questions began to fly. "Mr. Valmont, is it true you spent the night with an employee? Who is the young woman with you? How long have you two been in a relationship?" Arthur tried to shield Elena, covering her with his jacket and pushing a path to his car, but it was too late. The photos had already been taken, him protecting an unknown young woman, both in rumpled clothes, she clearly shaken in his arms. "Don't say anything," he murmured in her ear before handing her over to the driver. "Not a word to anyone." Over the next few days, Arthur tried to control the damage. He had lawyers specialized in crisis management, experienced press agents. The official version was simple. 2 employees got trapped during the storm, nothing more. But the official version rarely sells newspapers. Elena returned to work on Monday as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Colleagues watched her with a mixture of thinly veiled envy and scorn. "Look who got an interesting promotion," commented Fernanda from reception, loud enough for Elena to hear. "I always knew there was a calculating one behind those glasses," said Roberto from finance. "Playing the innocent for years to land the big one. What a smart strategy," added Mariana, a secretary in the legal department. Elena tried to ignore the comments, but each whispered jab felt like a stab. She had spent years being invisible, and now she desperately wished to return to invisibility. Arthur, for his part, tried to maintain professional distance, but found it impossible. His eyes constantly searched for Elena. He noticed when she arrived, when she left for lunch, when she stayed late. During meetings, he caught himself observing her delicate hands, taking notes, remembering how they had touched his face. The attempt to maintain distance only made things worse. Every time he treated her with excessive coldness in public, the malicious comments increased. "He's already tired of the new girl," someone would whisper. "Must have found out she's not worth risking his reputation for a mere secretary." On Thursday, Eleanor was working late again when Arthur appeared at her desk. The office was empty, just the 2 of them. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" she asked without looking up from her papers. "About this charade we're living, about pretending that night didn't happen." Elena finally looked at him, and Arthur saw restrained tears in her eyes. "Maybe it's better that way. Maybe we should pretend." "Elena, did you hear what they're saying about me?" Her voice trembled slightly. "That I'm an opportunist, a schemer, that I threw myself at you to get advantages. And does that matter to you?" "It matters because it's a lie," she exploded, finally letting the frustration spill out. "Because never in my life have I done something thinking of taking advantage of someone. Because the only thing I've ever had is my integrity, and now even that is being questioned." Arthur moved closer to her, but Elena recoiled. "No," she said, "don't make this harder than it already is." But it was too late. The connection between them had become impossible to ignore. Over the following days, they developed a secret language. Prolonged glances during meetings, fingers brushing when exchanging documents, seemingly professional conversations laden with subtext. The situation became untenable on Friday when Arthur called her to review contracts in his office. The closed door, the proximity, the accumulated tension, everything conspired against both their self-control. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse, "I can't stop thinking about you." "Arthur, we can't..." But he had already approached, his hands touching her face. "Say you don't feel it too. Say it's just me." "You know I can't say that," she whispered, closing her eyes as he leaned in to kiss her. The kiss was even more intense than the one during the storm. Desperate, hungry, loaded with days of repressed tension. Elena surrendered completely, her hands entwining in his hair. They only separated when they heard footsteps in the corridor. Arthur pulled away quickly, straightening his tie, while Elena tried to compose her appearance. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "My apartment. We need to sort this out." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. Neither of them noticed the figure who had been observing through the crack in the slightly ajar door. Marcus Thorne, Arthur's corporate rival, who had gained access to the building through internal contacts. The same man who had orchestrated Isabella's betrayal years ago. Marcus smiled maliciously, putting his cell phone back in his pocket after filming a few seconds of the intimate scene. "Interesting," he murmured to himself. "Very interesting." Arthur Valmont had finally given him the perfect weapon to destroy him. And this time, the weapon had a name: Elena Diaz. On Saturday morning, while Arthur awaited Elena in his apartment, prepared to finally admit he was in love with her, Marcus Thorne had already begun to move his pieces on the board. An envelope had been delivered to the front desk of Elena's apartment building. Inside, photos of the two kissing, along with a simple note: "Your little secretary is playing with fire. It would be a shame if these images reached the press." Or Valmont Tech's investors, "You have 48 hours to contact me." As MT, the game had begun, and neither of them had any idea that their newfound happiness was about to become a weapon against themselves. Elena arrived at Arthur's apartment that Saturday afternoon, with her heart pounding, but also carrying the weight of the envelope she had found at her front desk that morning. She had spent hours staring at the photos, feeling nausea grow in her stomach. The images clearly showed her and Arthur in a passionate kiss, taken through the crack in his office door. Arthur greeted her with a smile she rarely saw. Genuine, warm, vulnerable. He had prepared a simple dinner, lit some candles, transformed his minimalist apartment into something welcoming. "You came," he said, as if doubting she would appear. "I need to show you something," Elena said, unable to return his smile. Arthur immediately sensed something was wrong. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "What happened?" Elena pulled the envelope from her purse and handed it to him without a word. Arthur opened it, and his expression completely changed as he flipped through the photos. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. "Where did you get this?" "Someone left it at my front desk this morning," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "Arthur, what does this mean?" He studied the photos once more, his mind working furiously. "Marcus Thorne," he finally said, spitting out the name like venom. "It can only be him, the same man who orchestrated Isabella's betrayal." "Yes." Arthur stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "He must have people inside the company. Someone alerted him about us." "Us?" Elena's heart pounded. "Arthur, there's no us. It was just a kiss. It was just..." He turned to her with an intensity that made her recoil. "It was just a kiss. Elena, do you really believe that?" Before she could answer, Arthur's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face paled. "It's him," Arthur answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Arthur, my old friend." Marcus's voice was slick, satisfied. "I hope you're enjoying your romantic evening. What do you want, Thorne?" "Straight to the point. I've always admired that about you. I want 50% of Valmont Tech's shares, and I want your public resignation from the CEO position." Arthur laughed bitterly. "You've lost your mind." "Perhaps, but not as much as you have, falling for a mere innocent secretary." The pause was calculated, cruel. "Oh yes, Arthur, I know exactly who Elena Diaz is. 25 years old, orphaned, supports a sick grandmother and a brother in college. Tight financial situation. It would be a shame if something happened to her job or her brother's college tuition." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "You have 48 hours, Marcus continued, "or the photos will go to every newspaper across the country, along with a very interesting story about workplace sexual harassment. Imagine the headlines: 'Billionaire abuses vulnerable secretary.' Your investors will love it. And of course, Elena Diaz will become the most famous woman in America, for all the wrong reasons." The call ended, leaving a devastating silence in the apartment. Elena stood in the middle of the room, hugging her own body as if trying to hold herself together. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What have I done? What have we done?" Arthur tried to approach her, but Elena recoiled. "Elena, listen, we'll find a way out. My lawyers." "Your lawyers?" She cut him off, her voice rising an octave. "Arthur, did you hear what he said? He's going to ruin my life, my brother's life. And all for what? For a few stupid kisses?" "They weren't just kisses, and you know it," Arthur said, his own frustration showing. "Elena, No!" she screamed, covering her ears. "Don't say it! Don't make this worse than it already is." "Worse? Elena, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air like a condemnation. Elena stared at him with eyes full of tears and something that looked very much like horror. "You fell in love with me," she repeated slowly. "The powerful billionaire fell in love with the poor, pathetic secretary. What a romantic fantasy." Her voice was loaded with bitterness. "Except I'm not a character in a soap opera, Arthur. I'm a real person, with a real family that depends on me. And your passion just destroyed everything." Arthur felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "You can't be serious." "My brother could lose his scholarship. My grandmother could lose her medical treatment. I could lose my job and never get another. All because you decided you wanted me. That's not fair, Elena. You wanted me too. You returned every kiss, every touch, and that was my mistake," she exploded. "I should have learned my lesson with Daniel. Men like you always get what you want, no matter the cost. But the ones who pay the price are never you, it's people like me." The comparison to Daniel was like a slap in the face. Arthur recoiled, hurt. "You really believe I'm like him? That I planned this?" Elena looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the exact moment she closed her heart to him. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I just know I need to protect my family." "And how do you plan to do that?" "The only way I can." Eleanor took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "I'm going to find Marcus Thorne tomorrow. I'm going to tell him you harassed me, that I never reciprocated your advances, that it was all one-sided. I'm going to confirm his version." Arthur stared at her, incredulous. "Eleanor, you can't." "I can and I will. It's the only way to protect my family and still maintain some dignity. If he gets what he wants from you through my cooperation, maybe he'll leave my family alone." "And you really believe he'll keep his word?" "I have to try." Eleanor headed for the door, but stopped and turned around. "Arthur, please, don't try to contact me. Don't try to change my mind. You've already caused enough damage." "Elena, wait!" He ran after her, holding her arm. "I can protect you. I can..." "How?" She turned to him, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "How are you going to protect me, Arthur? By marrying me? By making our class difference official so the whole world can see how I don't belong in your world? Or are you going to keep me as a secret lover for the rest of your life?" Arthur was speechless because deep down he had no real answer to offer. "Exactly," Elena said, reading his silence. "You didn't even think about it, did you? For you, this was just an interesting fling, the invisible secretary who finally caught your attention. But you never considered what it would mean to actually be with me. That's not true. Then tell me, Arthur, what would it be like? Would you take me to your social events, introduce me to your billionaire friends, or would I remain your dirty little secret?" Arthur tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Elena nodded as if his hesitation confirmed her worst fears. "Goodbye, Arthur." She left the apartment, leaving Arthur alone in the middle of his perfectly tidy living room, with the romantic dinner cooling on the table and the candles still burning like a mockery of his shattered plans. The next morning, Eleanor was in Marcus Thorne's office, sitting in a leather chair that seemed to engulf her as she confirmed every detail of the version he had created. She signed documents, recorded statements, sold her soul to protect her family. Across town, Arthur received a call from his lawyer informing him that Elena Diaz had voluntarily approached Marcus Thorne and was fully cooperating with him. Valmont Tech stock began to plummet as the first news leaked. For the first time in his adult life, Arthur Valmont had found something more important than money or power, and he had lost it under the most devastating circumstances possible, betrayed not by his enemies, but by his own fears and limitations that he hadn't managed to overcome in time. A week had passed since Elena signed the documents at Marcus Thorne's office, and she felt like a lost soul wandering through her own life. She had returned to work at Valmont Tech. Thorne had insisted she kept up appearances until the legal process ran its course, but the atmosphere was unbearable. Arthur hadn't appeared at the office since Monday. According to rumors, he was holed up in meetings with lawyers and investors, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. Elena pretended not to care about his absence, but her eyes compulsively searched for him. Her co-workers had divided into two groups: those who treated her as a brave victim who had finally exposed her abusive boss, and those who saw her as an opportunist who had destroyed a man for money. Neither version reflected the truth, and Elena felt suffocated by the weight of the lie. On Thursday night, while organizing the personal belongings on her desk, she knew she would be fired as soon as the scandal broke publicly. Elena found something that made her stop. Among the papers was an unmarked white envelope, different from the one she had received from Thorne. Inside, a single sheet with a typed message: "If you truly care about the truth, meet me at the Central Cafe on West 4th Street tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll go to the restroom at 6:15 p.m. Enter the third stall. Someone who knows MT's true motives." Elena reread the message several times, her heart pounding. It could be a trap, but something about the note's wording intrigued her. Who else knew Marcus's true motives? On Friday, Eleanor arrived at the Central Cafe 15 minutes late, nervous and constantly looking over her shoulder. The place was bustling, filled with college students and people leaving work. At 6:30 p.m., she headed to the women's restroom and entered the third stall as instructed. There was an envelope taped behind the toilet. With trembling hands, Elena removed it and opened it. Inside, several photos and documents made her blood run cold. The first photos showed Marcus Thorne in an elegant restaurant, talking intimately with a sophisticated blonde woman whom Elena immediately recognized from gossip magazines: Isabella Vance, Arthur's ex-fiancée. The photos were dated 6 months ago. There were also bank statements showing regular transfers from Thorne's account to Isabella's, all within the last 8 months. And even more shockingly, contracts from a private investigation firm hired to monitor Arthur Valmont's activities and identify potential personal or professional vulnerabilities. The final document was a transcript of a phone conversation between Thorne and Isabella. "Marcus, he's still alone after 3 years. He needs to find someone." Isabella: "Arthur learned not to trust women from our circles. He's too savvy." Marcus: "So it needs to be someone different, someone he wouldn't suspect, someone innocent." Isabella: "An employee?" Marcus: "Even better, the right employee. Someone with financial problems, a vulnerable family, someone we can manipulate when necessary." Isabella: "And how are we going to make him interested in just any secretary?" Marcus: "Leave that to me. A small accident, a situation of forced proximity. Arthur has a hidden hero complex. If we create the right situation..." Eleanor felt nausea rise in her throat. The storm, the security system that failed. She and Arthur trapped together in the penthouse. None of it had been an accident. Her hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the papers. They had planned everything. They had manipulated not only her, but Arthur too. They had turned their genuine feelings into a weapon against both of them. Leaving the restroom in a state of shock, Eleanor barely noticed the figure discreetly observing her from a table in the corner of the cafe. It was a middle-aged, elegantly dressed woman who subtly waved when Elena looked at her. Elena approached, still holding the envelope. "Are you the one who sent me this?" The woman nodded, gesturing for Elena to sit. "My name is Patricia Sterling. I was Marcus Thorne's personal assistant until 2 months ago. Why did you show me this?" Patricia sighed heavily. Because I saw what he did to Arthur 3 years ago. I saw how he destroyed a good man using a woman who pretended to love him. And now he's doing the same thing again, only this time he's using you as a pawn in his game. But I cooperated with him voluntarily. I lied about Arthur because he blackmailed you through your family. Patricia said gently. Marcus researched your entire life, Elena. He knew exactly which buttons to push to make you cooperate, just as he knew exactly how to create the situation for you and Arthur to get close. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. So, our feelings. Everything was a lie? No, Patricia said firmly. Your feelings are real. Marcus just created the opportunity. He couldn't control how you would feel, only ensure you met under the right circumstances. Why are you telling me this? Why are you helping me? Patricia looked out the cafe window, her expression melancholic. Because 3 years ago, when I found out what Marcus had done with Isabella, I did nothing. I kept silent for fear of losing my job. Arthur Valmont was destroyed by a conspiracy, and I could have prevented it, but I chose my financial security. She turned to Elena with determination. I won't stay silent again, but I need your help. My help for what? To expose Marcus publicly. These documents prove the conspiracy. But I need someone on the inside, someone Arthur trusts, to ensure the truth reaches him and the right media outlets. Elena shook her head desperately. Arthur doesn't trust me. I betrayed him. You were manipulated, Patricia corrected. And if Arthur truly loves you as I suspect, he'll understand that when he knows the complete truth. What if he doesn't understand? What if it's too late? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes intense. Elena, in 48 hours, Marcus will publicly announce your agreement. Arthur will be forced to resign and transfer 50% of the company. After that, even if the truth is revealed, it might be too late to revert the legal damage. What do you want me to do? Marcus is throwing a party tomorrow night at his home, a premature celebration, let's say. Isabella will be there. She wants to see Arthur destroyed personally. All the important investors, the industry press. It will be the perfect stage to expose the truth. Elena felt her blood run cold. You want me to go to the party? I want you to go as my guest. I still have contacts. I can get you in. With these documents and a recording of their confession. Patricia paused. Elena, this is our only chance to save Arthur and clear his name, but it's also your only chance to truly be free of Marcus. Do you think he'll leave you alone after he gets what he wants? He'll always have those photos for blackmail. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. She was being asked to voluntarily enter the wolf's den, to confront the man who had manipulated her entire life. But when she thought of Arthur, the way he had protected her during the storm, the sincerity of his feelings, the pain in his eyes when she left him, she knew she had no choice. What do I need to do? Patricia smiled for the first time since the conversation began. You need to be brave. And you need to trust that Arthur Valmont is the man you believe him to be. Elena nodded, putting the documents back in her purse. For the first time in a week, she felt something beyond despair and guilt. She felt determination. Marcus Thorne had played with their lives as if they were pieces on a board, but the game wasn't over yet, and Elena was about to turn the tables. Marcus Thorne's party was in full swing when Elena arrived at the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, accompanied by Patricia. The place teemed with New York's corporate elite, investors, industry journalists, and corporate personalities. Elena felt completely out of place in her simple borrowed dress, but Patricia reassured her with a squeeze of the hand. Remember, you have every right to be here, Patricia whispered. You are the victim in this story. Elena carried a small clutch where she had hidden a digital recorder and copies of the documents Patricia had shown her. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. To get Marcus or Isabella to confess the conspiracy on record and then expose everything publicly at the same party. Marcus greeted them with a predatory smile when they reached the main ballroom. "Patricia, what a pleasant surprise! And you brought our little heroine," he said, kissing Elena's hand with exaggerated theatricality. "Elena, I hope you're enjoying your newfound fame. Very kind of you to invite me," Elena replied, forcing a smile. Her hands were sweating, but she tried to maintain her composure. "But of course, you're the star of the moment, the brave secretary who stood up to the powerful Arthur Valmont." Marcus lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, I hope you're satisfied with our partnership. Quite profitable for both parties." Elena felt nauseous but nodded, very satisfied. Marcus smiled contentedly and moved away to greet other guests. Patricia approached Elena. "He's overconfident. That's good for us. Isabella should be on the back patio. She always liked to strike dramatic poses. I'll go and coax her into boasting. You stay here and try a similar approach with Marcus." Elena nodded nervously, discreetly activating the recorder in her clutch. About 30 minutes later, as the party grew livelier and champagne had flowed generously, Elena approached Marcus again. He was talking with a group of investors near the bar. "Marcus," she said softly, "can I speak with you for a moment? In private." He seemed intrigued, but nodded to the other men and followed her to a more private corner of the ballroom. "I'm worried," Elena said, feigning nervousness. "What if someone discovers the truth? What if Arthur suspects it was all planned?" Marcus laughed too loudly, the champagne clearly affecting him. "Elena, my dear, Arthur Valmont is many things, but he is not stupid. If he suspected the storm was orchestrated, that the security system was sabotaged by my contacts inside the company, do you think he wouldn't have investigated?" Elena felt her heart pound. He was confessing everything without realizing it. "But what if he finds out about you and Isabella, the payments, the plans?" "How would he find out?" Marcus leaned closer, his voice low and confident. "Isabella is a natural actress. She pretended to love that idiot for 2 years, collecting every intimate piece of information I needed. And now she's pretending to be a hurt and betrayed woman while collecting her payments for a job well done." Elena could barely breathe, but forced herself to continue. "And what happens to me now? After everything is made official?" "You," Marcus smiled coldly, "you continue to be the brave victim. You can even write a book, give lectures on workplace harassment. You'll be a minor celebrity, but respectable. What if I decide to tell the truth?" Marcus's smile disappeared, and Elena saw the cold cruelty in his eyes. "Elena, do you really think we got this far without considering that possibility? We have recordings of you confirming every detail of our version. We have signed documents. If you try to go back on it, not only will you look like an opportunistic liar, but I will personally ensure your grandmother loses her medical coverage and your brother is expelled from college for academic fraud. It's not hard to plant evidence." In that moment, Elena completely understood the extent of Marcus's malice. He hadn't just manipulated her feelings, he had created a prison from which she could never escape. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Marcus said, "I have important guests to entertain, and in 48 hours, I'll own 50% of the largest tech company in the country." He walked away, leaving Elena trembling with rage and renewed determination. It was then that she saw him. Arthur Valmont stood at the entrance of the ballroom, devastatingly elegant in his black tuxedo, but with a somber expression that made the entire ballroom gradually quiet. All eyes turned to him, some shocked, others curious, many clearly unsettled. Marcus paused in the middle of the ballroom, his confident smile wavering slightly. "Arthur," he said loudly for all to hear. "What a surprise! I didn't know you still had the nerve to show your face in public." Arthur walked slowly through the ballroom, and Elena noticed he carried a leather briefcase. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she saw something that reassured her. There was no accusation in his gaze, only a cold determination. I came for what's mine, Arthur said, his voice cutting the silence like a blade. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Marcus replied, regaining his composure. The documents have been signed, the evidence is clear. You abused your position, Arthur. You harassed a vulnerable employee. Evidence, Arthur repeated slowly. Speaking of evidence, he opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents and photographs. Elena immediately recognized them. They were the same materials Patricia had shown her, but Arthur had even more. Patricia Sterling was very helpful, Arthur said, looking directly at Marcus. Recordings of phone conversations between you and Isabella. Documents from the sabotage firm you hired to interfere with my building security system. Bank statements showing regular payments to your, shall we say, hired actress? Marcus's face visibly paled. And what's most interesting, Arthur continued, his voice gaining strength, recordings of your conversation with Elena just minutes ago, where you confessed to having orchestrated everything. Elena felt relief flood her as she realized Arthur had discovered the truth. Somehow, he knew about their plan. You have nothing, Marcus said, but his voice trembled slightly. Arthur turned to the assembled guests, his presence commanding full attention. Ladies and gentlemen, you were invited to a celebration party. Marcus Thorne was celebrating what he believed to be my final downfall. But in truth, you are witnessing the exposure of one of the most elaborate and cruel conspiracies I have ever seen in the corporate world. He began distributing copies of the documents to the journalists present. 3 years ago, this man destroyed my personal life by using a woman he had planted to spy on and betray me. Isabella Vance was not a fiancée who abandoned me for greed. She was a hired spy from the very beginning. Shocked murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Isabella, who had appeared from the patio attracted by the commotion, was pale as a ghost. And now, Arthur continued, he repeated the same scheme, only this time he decided to use an innocent victim as a weapon against me. Arthur turned to Elena, and for the first time since he entered the ballroom, his gaze softened. Elena Diaz is not an opportunist or a blackmailer. She is an honest, hard-working young woman who was manipulated by an unscrupulous man who knew exactly how to use her dedication to her family against her. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Marcus Thorne orchestrated our getting close. He sabotaged the security system to force us to be trapped together. He investigated Elena's life to know her vulnerabilities. And when the genuine feelings we developed for each other became evident, he turned them into a weapon of blackmail. Arthur approached Elena, stopping directly in front of her. Elena, you thought you were protecting me when you cooperated with him. But you were just becoming another victim of a man who sees people as chess pieces. Arthur, Elena began, but he gently raised his hand. You don't need to explain yourself. I understand why you did what you did. I understand you were protecting the people you love. And that's exactly why I fell in love with you. The ballroom was completely silent now, all the guests mesmerized by the unfolding drama before them. Marcus, Arthur said, turning to his enemy, you made a crucial mistake. You thought you could use love as a weapon, but true love cannot be manipulated. It can only be chosen. Marcus tried one last-ditch effort. You can't prove any of this. They're just recordings, official documents, witnesses. Arthur cut him off. Patricia Sterling has already given a full deposition. The sabotage firm has already confessed in exchange for immunity. And Elena has recorded every word you said tonight. Elena took the recorder from her clutch, holding it up for everyone to see. Marcus's expression shifted from arrogance to despair in a matter of seconds. Gentlemen of the press, Arthur said to the journalists present, you have quite a story to tell tomorrow. The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Journalists asked questions. Photographers snapped pictures. Marcus and Isabella tried to hide from the crowd. Patricia appeared beside Elena, smiling with satisfaction. In the midst of all the confusion, Arthur approached Elena again. You were incredibly brave, he said softly. I almost ruined everything, she replied, tears finally streaming freely. No, Arthur said firmly. You saved everything. Elena, when Patricia approached me with the evidence, when I learned the whole truth about what Marcus had done to us, I realized something important. He took her hands in his. Our feelings weren't manipulated. The situation that brought us closer may have been orchestrated, but what we feel for each other is real. It's ours, and no one can take that from us. Elena looked into his eyes, seeing absolute sincerity. Arthur, I never belonged in your world. I still don't. Then let's create our own world, he said simply. A world where it doesn't matter where we came from, but where we want to go together. He knelt right there, amidst the chaos of the party, pulling a small box from his pocket. Elena Diaz, will you marry me? Not because someone manipulated us to be together, but because we choose to be together despite everything. Elena looked around, at the journalists documenting every second, at the shocked guests observing, at Patricia smiling through tears of joy. And then she looked at Arthur, the man who had faced all of New York's corporate elite to clear her name, who had risked everything to prove her innocence. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, for all to hear. Yes, I will. The ballroom erupted in murmurs and camera flashes. Arthur slid the ring onto her finger and stood, taking her in his arms. Just to make it clear to everyone, he said loudly, still holding Elena, I am not marrying a vulnerable secretary who needs saving. I am marrying the bravest and most principled woman I have ever known, who risked everything to protect her family and then risked everything again to do the right thing. Eleanor smiled through her tears, feeling for the first time in weeks that she could breathe freely. 6 months later, Arthur and Elena's story had become a legend in the American corporate world. Marcus Thorne was facing multiple lawsuits for conspiracy and blackmail. Isabella had discreetly disappeared abroad. Patricia Sterling had become the director of human resources at Valmont Tech, and at the altar of a small church in New York, surrounded by Eleanor's grandmother, with renewed health thanks to the best medical treatment available, by Lucas, now graduated with an engineering degree and working at Valmont Tech, and by a select group of true friends, Arthur and Elena exchanged vows that no one had written for them. I promise to love you, not because we were forced by circumstances to meet, Arthur said, but because we choose every day to be together. I promise to trust you not because you saved me, Elena replied, but because you showed me that true love is worth any risk. And when they kissed, sealing a union that had begun in a storm and survived all the storms that came after, everyone present knew they were witnessing something rare, a love that had been tested by fire and emerged even stronger. The wealthiest man in New York had found his true richness, and the invisible secretary had discovered that she had always been seen by the right eyes at the right time for the love of her life.